If you are fresh with us this morning, we are almost at the conclusion. We still have another 4 weeks to go, but we are getting dangerously close to getting to the end of Ephesians. We're up to chapter 6. We've been in Ephesians now for about 12 weeks or so, and it's been good. This morning, though, we're going to take some time. We're going to look at Jesus' example to us at home and at work. And all of this actually comes out of this passage that we started to look at last week from Ephesians 5, verse 21, which says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. We looked at, we said how submission really follows this pattern where Paul says, hey, do not get drunk on wine, but rather be filled with the Spirit. And then he gives 3 quantifying things of what being filled with the Spirit, or a life being filled with the Spirit, is going to look like. I don't know if you remember them, but there was thanksgiving. There was, what were they? Does anyone remember? Speaking. Yeah, so speaking psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Excuse me. Harms, is that a new word? Could be. And then there was thanksgiving. So living a life in the Spirit looks like we're going to overflow with joy and thanksgiving. And then finally, he says the third thing is going to be submission. And submission, he said, is going to look like these 3 things, right? We looked at the marriage bed last week. So what it looks like to submit to one another as husband and wife. And this week, we're going to look at what it looks like a child to a parent and really in the family home. And then finally, what submission looks like at work, all right? But it starts with this, and I need you to understand this. The whole element starts with submitting to one another out of our deep respect for Christ. And that word, as we briefly looked at there, it means hupatasso, which means voluntary come under, right? So it's a choice. Submission in the kingdom is a choice. But we choose to come under the authority of another. And for most of the time, we've looked at the last couple of weeks about how Jesus is our example of that. We all submit, but it's a choice. We looked at this idea that the culture of this world is actually quite selfish. It says me first, and its primary focus is about us as the individual versus the culture of heaven, which is actually about submission. It says you first. I choose to yield to you. So there's quite a difference in how the kingdom works versus how the culture works. And again, we looked at Jesus as the example. He who was God chose to humble himself, to submit to the will of the Father, to even die for us. That's phenomenal. We then looked at, though, he used his power, his authority, and his position, and he chose to raise us up and seat us with him. And he's called us to be co-heirs with him. And then he says to husbands, now, hey, that's the same charge you have, and the way that I'm going to call you to love your wife. To use your position of authority, your position of headship to raise up your wife. Anyway, if you missed that, you can go back and listen to that from last week. But essentially, Jesus is the example. And then this week, we are going to look at what does it mean for kids to submit to their parents and slaves to their masters. And I've got a little treat for you at about the 3/4 way mark, I hope. All right, so here we go. Children, obey. Can you say obey for me? Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor. Can you say honor? Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. It's interesting. So that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy a long life on the earth. The first thing kids are called to do in submission is submit to their parents as to the Lord. It's a stronger commandment than submit. They're called to obey. And you'll notice the quantifying phrase there, in the Lord. So he's actually talking here quite specifically about kids who live in a faith household, right? And I guess he's kind of making the point, if you live in a house that wants to sacrifice to other gods, Paul would probably say, hey, you don't have to do that part. But he's saying here that kids who live in Christian homes, you need to submit to your parents who are also in the faith. Kids are submit to their parents. Why? Because parents are supposed to be submitting to the Lord. Does that make sense? It's assumed that. But we're all called to obey Christ. And in fact, John 14:15 says, Jesus says, if you love me, you will obey my commands. In the kingdom, it's not we obey and then we're loved. Again, that's probably more of the worldly thing. It says, I love you when you do something for me. In the kingdom, it doesn't work that way. The kingdom says God has poured out his love upon you, right? And it's that love that transforms us and actually then makes us want to obey. So I guess that's a good little reminder for parents. Do you love your kids in such a way that make them want to obey? I'm not asking you. There's my son, I asked. It's his 15th birthday today. Now you're listening. Good. Oh, dear. Honour. The next word, honour. So obey and honour. Kids, that's what you're called to do. And if you're under 18, 25, 35, 45, if your parents are still alive, in some respects, this still applies to you too. But honour is also used here as a command given to kids. Honour your mum and dad. It means to treat your mum and dad with a high regard and respect. And if you're over the age of 12, you've discovered that your parents aren't Superman or Superwoman. They make mistakes. They get it wrong. They may not be the hero in the cape anymore, but you're still called to honour them. And this is a quote from the 5th of the 10 Commandments. Right? And we're told that honouring mum and dad is actually going to bring you a promise, and that promise is twofold. Number one, things are going to go well for you. Number two, your life will last longer. Those are pretty good promises. If you think about the opposite of those, what happens if you don't obey and don't honour your parents? Life's not going to go well for you, and it's potentially going to be cut short. We know, though, especially parents who have walked this earth a while, kids don't always honour and obey their parents. They don't always make good decisions. They hit hard times, they head off the rails, things happen. Sometimes it can take a long time to get back. They pay the price and life can become quite difficult. Paul's saying, hey, listen, if your parents love Jesus, they should be submitting to Jesus and their life should give you a good path that you should follow. Many of us haven't had that. Some of you are sitting here today and your parents don't believe in Jesus. You need to get pretty close to Jesus, read the word, discover who he is, get yourself discipled well so you can follow him so that your kids have something to look up to. But kids, you need to listen to your mum and dad. They might seem old to you, but let's be honest, they've lived life too. They've already walked that journey themselves. And I want to say, parents, this is one thing that I actually think we don't do very well, particularly in faith. We're not honest about our own personal struggles that we went through when we were kids, when we were that age. My dad didn't tell me too much about the junk he went through until I was quite late on in life. Because we were encouraged, you don't talk about your old former self, you don't talk about the things you did. My dad lived very rough when he was younger. I really wish he'd spent more time telling us about where he came from and how he got to the position he's in. So parents, can I just encourage you, talk to your kids. Be vulnerable with them. Tell them the mistakes you've made because it actually lends strength and encouragement to them as they're going through their own personal journey. We need to bring them into the hard conversations, how we got it wrong and how we found our way back onto the path. But to parents whose kids are not walking in a relationship with God, Jesus is still the example. I'm conscious of how many people like Zacchaeus, the woman at the well, or the woman caught in adultery, who Jesus goes to, and without condemnation, he extends grace, compassion, kindness, and in his actions, he demonstrates a massive amount of love. Not conviction, or he brings conviction, but not condemnation. It's his love that brings conviction, and it's his love and it's his acceptance that basically opens up the door for them to change their life. We want to live in such a way as parents, and don't forget we are saying love looks like grace, truth, and boundaries. And you need to keep all of those three in tension, right? We don't let people walk on us, but parents, love your kids well with grace, truth, and boundaries. Remember that Jesus is the example as we are called to follow God. So too, the gospel we've received is the same thing we should model. And Jesus definitely didn't say, obey me and then I'll love you. Rather, because we are loved, we choose to obey. Next, we have a little word to fathers. Do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. You'll notice the first section's to parents. This section now is just to fathers. It's interesting, isn't it? I don't know if you ever thought about that. The first bit, okay, so, kids, you're to obey and honour your parents. But this bit now is specifically to fathers. And he's going to say two things here. He's going to say, first, dads, don't irritate or frustrate the heck out of your kids. Don't talk. Do you know what? Josiah actually did say something to somebody recently, which is so bad. But anyway, he said, you can't take my dad seriously unless he's preaching. I do like to joke. And Eva has this little thing that she often says to me. She goes, Dad, if I say seriously, you have to be serious now. We're about to spend the next 3 days in our smallish car with all 6 of us driving to Queensland. It's going to be fun. You might have to remind me of this verse often. So dads, we don't want to frustrate our kids. And I actually think, I joke about that, but we don't want to put a yoke on our kids that's something that they can't stand under. We don't want to put our expectations or our goals or our hopes or our desires onto God's creation who we've been entrusted with to look after and lead. You with me? And I think that's tough sometimes. But instead, we're called to train them and instruct them in the way of the Lord. A good buddy of mine says that it's the father's role to impart a healthy and Christ-like identity to the kids. I believe that. But dads, we're called to raise up our kids in the training and the instruction of the Lord. There is something significant about fathers and kids. Do you know currently in Australia there's 870,000 kids without a dad living in their home? About 1 in 6 families. And 85% of single-parent families are headed by women. Common associations or high correlations between kids with absent fathers are poor self-care, low self-esteem, risky behaviour, including early drug and alcohol abuse than their equals, higher levels of delinquency, significantly higher crime rate and overrepresentation in prisons. Dads, you really matter in your kid's life. And it's your job and your joy to impart a healthy Christ-like identity to your kids. I've been really thankful for Rowan, who has taken us on a journey as fathers recently, fathers with boys. We've been looking at just what it means to be a man and how we raise our kids to be men who use their God-given positions to just honour the world around them. But it's been phenomenal. We've been doing that now for the last couple of years, and we've seen a massive change in our kids, just hungry to learn about who they are, hungry to get in the Word of God. But we'll just encourage you, as parents, it's our job that kids just are raised, that they learn, that they know the truth about who Jesus is, because he is our example. We give out this book when you get dedicated here in this church. When you get your child dedicated, it's called the Jesus Storybook. And I love this Bible because what it does is it's the Bible in like little kid picture story, but basically it shows how every story in the Old Testament points to the Messiah, Jesus, and his ultimate fulfillment, his ultimate coming. So it's a beautiful book that helps kids understand. Secondly, if you've got a kid that's got a great imagination, this Action Bible, man, it brings the Bible alive. It is absolutely phenomenal. It's like a comic form Bible. The dude who wrote that is a master. There's the Minecraft Bible. There are lots of ways, though, for dads and mums that you can get your kids involved in the Word. It's awesome. But our call is to train our kids to follow the example that Jesus set for us. Because Jesus is the example. Cool. All right, we're going to shift gears. We're going to move into our next one now. From parents into the workforce. And here's the deal. Our first verse is, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Before we go on and look at the rest of this, I just need to give a quick comment on slavery, because slavery in Paul's day is very different to the Hollywood picture that we've been presented with about what slavery is. Does that make sense? So slavery in Paul's day is very, very different to, the early American days in the 1700s, in the English era as well. When Paul wrote about this concept of slavery, he was not talking about a slavery that came through a racism of a culture where one culture or one tribe of people says, I am universally better than you, it's your job to obey me. And therefore, there's a class system where I am higher than you. That was not what Paul wrote about in his day and age. You were a slave for life in, the American sort of picture we get of slavery, and that defined who you were as a person. And I will just add here that it actually was Christianity, people that were devoted to the Word of God, and that passage in Galatians 5 that we looked at last week, that there's no Jew, no Gentile, no slave, no free, no male or female. It was inconsistencies with what Jesus called us to do that basically brought about the abolition of slavery through Christianity, or through people that were passionate about God's call for equality. But slavery in the context of Paul's writing has much more to do with two key things. Usually it came through when you went to war with another culture and you lost, or another tribe or another ethnic group, you basically became their slave and you would work for them. But slavery wasn't like what we see it as. You kind of worked on their farm or worked in their property. Or second, it might have even been from somebody who was part of your own tribe. And sometimes it was in regards to that you would allow yourself to become a slave if you had a debt that you couldn't pay. And then you would work that debt off. But the thing about slavery in this concept is it was for a period of time. And the other important thing that we should know is there were courts set up where slaves could take their masters to court. So it wasn't that picture of total domination that we often see in the movies. It was a much more fair and, well, not super equitable, but still, it was more like a job. And the reason why I say that is because we're going to read these words like slavery in here, and Paul's not saying, hey, this is still a license to have slaves. Not at all. In fact, the context that we're next going to read, he's going to say that slaves need to be treated the same as their master because that's how the Father sees them. But many of us could agree that in many times in our working lives, we can feel a little bit like we're slaves to the system. We work for the man, we go to work, come home, don't love our boss, whatever it is. I need to work today because I've got to pay my bills. But many go to work and they hate what they have to do, but they do so for the goal of survival or provision. Sometimes for purpose. Here, though, Paul's really encouraging us to take a minute to stop and to look at our attitude and our effort in the workplace as an example to reflect the faith and submission that we have towards God. I'm going to get my friend to come join me now. I've asked Sheree to come share some stuff with us. She's worked in the arts sector as a writer for a few years now. And I wanted her to come and share with us a little bit about how her faith has impacted her work as a writer. Because as you can probably imagine, it's a pretty difficult place to be a person of faith as a writer. We're not in the popular majority. Christianity is not, if you haven't noticed that. So I wanted Sheree to come and talk about how she submits to both her employer and the Lord in her role as a writer and at work.
Well, thanks, Steve. All right. If you think that as someone whose passion and until recently primary income is words, I would enjoy delivering them out loud and on the fly, you would be wrong. So when Steve asked if I could share a bit about my faith and how it intersects with my work as a writer, I asked if I could write it instead. He agreed and I was grateful. I often tell people I'm better on paper than in person. Writing is in my blood and in my family's DNA. My grandmother's cousin, Nan Hunt, was a well-known children's book writer in the 80s and 90s, and we became friends before she died. She had a brilliant faith, a brilliant mind, and a wicked sense of humour. Nan never wrote Christian stories in the same way that a Christian builder doesn't use Christian bricks. I can thank Frankie Schaefer, son of Francis, for that analogy. She wrote rollicking adventure stories for kids, including her most famous Whistle Up the Chimney, about an old lady who watches a commuter train barrel through her lounge room every evening. It wasn't even a metaphor. She told me she'd received a firewood delivery from a guy who said it came off train sleepers, and the idea was born. I'll come back to Nan as she plays a part in my own writing journey. When I finished high school, I enrolled in a creative arts and theology college at Christian City Church in Sydney. I studied acting and loved being around other Christian artists. Our passionate principal, Jeff Crabtree, would talk to us about what it means to be a Christian artist, always emphasising being excellent at your craft, whatever it was. He was the one who told us about Frankie Schaefer's philosophy that Christian builders don't use Christian bricks. We all have God's imprint on our souls, whether Christian or not. And Jeff spoke about the rocks crying out. You can see God's glory in art, whether it's overtly Christian or not. You don't need to whack a Bible verse at the bottom of a beautiful landscape painting to be inspired by God's creation. It depends on the lens through which you're looking. So our job as Christian artists, according to Jeff, was to be really good at our craft. If we worked hard enough and eventually gained a platform, people might be interested to hear about our faith. He would talk about U2 and their model of faith and music. So much of their faith is embedded in their music, but it's also just really good. He played us a clip of a live U2 performance, How Long, Bono sings over and over again, based on Psalm 40. He lifts his hands to heaven, eyes closed, and the crowd does the same. What is that? Jeff would say excitedly. He's just turned it into a worship session. In my 20s, I had a burning desire to take writing seriously. I enrolled in a postgraduate course at university. I'm not sure if you've been to a university recently, but the one I went to in inner city Sydney was full of young progressives to whom religion is a dirty word. I don't know if it was ever directly stated or if I took it as conventional wisdom, but in my head I thought, don't write explicitly about your faith. I wanted to be taken seriously as a writer, and I was certain that faith would discredit me and put me in the category of people who believe in fairies. But it didn't matter anyway to the 5 people who were reading the blogs that I was hammering out. Then, about 4 years ago, I had a big break. I submitted a story about Nan Hunt and our friendship to The Australian, and they accepted it. It was the greatest thrill to see my words and name in a national newspaper, and I was addicted. I started to pitch opinion pieces to the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and to my shock, they started accepting them. I wasn't writing about anything serious, mind you. I think my first opinion piece was about whether women should be granted period leave from work, and what a luxury that would be when, as a stay-at-home parent, you don't get leave from your kids. I started pitching and writing for more places and watched as my hobby became an income. I still had this conventional wisdom in my head that I shouldn't share my faith, but I wrestled with it a lot. I wondered what the point was, writing about local councils banning G-strings at public swimming pools or developing texting thumb tendinitis. Was I really using my gifts to glorify God? Is this where he wanted me to be, or should I be more explicit about my faith? I wrote about Hillsong through the lens of someone who had been to a similar megachurch in Sydney for many years. Despite all the good that they have done and continue to do, I felt they'd missed the mark in trying to make Christianity cool and palatable. I wrestled a lot with this piece and faced criticism for writing it at all, including from a few people close to me. Why did you have to write it? One person asked. It's just what I do. It's how I process the world. I said, still not entirely sure if I'd done the right thing. But I was able to express in that column what I did think Jesus would do if he received an invitation to speak at a big flashy church and hang out in the green room with Christian celebrities. I thought he'd probably rather go to the soup kitchen in King's Cross. I also wrote a column criticising the hypocrisy of a band who pulled out of a large gig because of another band playing with a member who'd had questionable behaviour. I challenged the moral high ground in that happens so often and easily on social media, and wrote, "Perhaps we have thrown the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to church. Maybe there are a few things we should hold on to, such as, do not judge lest you be judged, or why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? And even those without sin cast the first stone." It was cool to be able to quote scripture in the papers, even though I didn't know when I first started writing that column that's where I'd end up. And surprising how many people agreed with this biblical wisdom, whether they were believers or not. I've referred to my faith in a number of columns now, and much more explicitly in one particular publication. I've started to see that maybe God has given me a platform for this very reason. My humour and writing about frivolous things was the groundwork for writing about things closer to my heart and sometimes my faith. I've written a bit now about AI and how it's subtly transforming our humanity. We are becoming less human in our behaviours and interactions with technology. This is a natural link to the Christian belief that humans are sacred and made in the image of God, and yet we're seeking these fake copies of what a good life is. Like it says in 1 Corinthians, seeing a dim reflection as in a mirror. Technology is so enticing and addictive, but as C.S. Lewis wrote, our desires are too weak and we are far too easily pleased, fooling around with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is on offer to us. I think if Lewis were around today, he would add YouTube or social media to that list. In light of our surrounding culture, which is far too easily pleased by our shiny technologies, Christianity has more to say than ever. The other thing I want to say about my faith, and the other reason I started to write about it publicly, despite my initial belief I wouldn't be taken seriously, as well as a God-given courage, is the type of faith my parents instilled in me. Not just the happy, clappy, Pentecostal type I grew up with, but a faith that can withstand intellectual rigour. Our house growing up was packed with books, many from Christian thinkers like C.S. Lewis, Frederick Buechner, and G.K. Chesterton, to name a few. Reading work by these greats, I know that the Christian faith can stand up to robust intellectual criticisms. My parents, Monty, and I recently watched a debate between former atheist and writer Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Richard Dawkins. Ali argues eloquently about the moral vacuum we now find in the West, where university students are utterly lost and embracing cultish mind viruses like wokeism. She is an intelligent woman who once argued fiercely against Christianity and is now using her intelligence to argue for it. These are the kinds of thinkers I am inspired by, who use their intellect to shine light into the world and call out moral bankruptcy. Another aspect of writing or any kind of creative work is ego and the constant struggle with it. People clap you on the back and say, "You're so clever," and it's difficult not to let it get to your head. This was another thing Jeff Crabtree would speak about at college. Satan was the head worship leader before he got booted out because of his ego. He lost perspective on the natural order of things with God at the head of everything. Although you get pats on the back when you have success, this isn't a constant reality either. People only see when you succeed. They don't see the constant rejections that happen in between. You have to find a way to sustain yourself through the highs and lows, and like so many things in the Christian faith, it's better to seek God for sustenance than to do things in your own strength, even if I don't always remember to do this. I try to frame my writing practice the way Michelangelo and other great artists of his time framed their work, all for the glory of God. God is the original storyteller, the source of all creativity and inspiration. I involve him in my work, asking for ideas and thanking him for any success I achieve to help keep my ego in check. Even when I'm not explicitly writing about my Christian faith, I still get a sense of God being pleased that I'm using a gift he's given me. I'm on a journey to discover how closely my faith intersects with my creative work, and I would certainly not say that I've arrived. Now I've started teaching English and creative writing in high school, and it's a joy to share my passion with teenagers. I feel God is able to use me more directly to be light to kids who may be struggling with mental health or dramas at home. I would love to be a total writing hermit, stay at home pumping out novels and articles, but I think God has me where he wants me. And it's nice to feel like I'm being used more practically than trying to work out whether my writing about my relationship with my fitness tracker is actually for the glory of God. Understanding how my faith intersects with my work as a writer hasn't been black and white. I think this is often the case for Christians. Some types of work seem more clearly aligned with evangelism or blessing people and all those other traditional Christian activities. But I've learnt to simply keep committing my work to God, asking to be used, whether I see immediate, tangible results or not.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sheree. You're a gift. And I'm thankful that you use your gifts both in your workplace, the places the Lord has you, but also here amongst us. Here's something I heard her say. Just be really good at your craft, whatever it is. You know, we talk about this every now and again, but I think his name is Jezreel. He was the first person in the Bible to be endowed with the Spirit of God, and he was an artist. God loves the arts because it's constantly an expression of him. Did you hear that bit too about there's no such thing as Christian bricks, just Christian brickies? I love that. I think sometimes we can over-spiritualize some of the things we do. We're just called to be good at what we do and honour the Lord in it. Just like Sheree is using her gifts to honour the Lord, not just lip service, but in her attitude, in her intellect, and even in her humour as well. I love that. Not taking the credit, but being humble. And finally, giving all glory where it's due, back to the Lord. Thankful for you, Sheree. As we finish up today, I want to give you 4 things that are going to come out of this second section that's going to talk about like just how are we to behave at work. Number 1, we should obey the people that we work for with our respect and our submission, just as we would Christ. The first command is that we respect, fear, and serve with a sincerity of heart, just as we do when we obey the Lord. And that, can I be honest, that's quite countercultural. Paul is actually saying here, you should serve your boss with the same respect that you would serve the Lord. That's pretty full on. So you don't just work just to get the job done, to pass the day or pass the hours. We serve in such a way that it actually reflects our love and devotion for the Lord. We looked at this last week. The culture of this world says personal power and says bigger, stronger, and better. But the culture of heaven is servanthood, and it says that the first will be last, and the least will actually become the greatest. The second thing is be workers of integrity, right? So you work not when the eye of the boss is on you, not just to win their favor. Work whether they're looking at you or they're not looking at you. Because what you do actually matters. I don't know if you believe that, but we've certainly seen that. We've certainly seen what happens when people of faith and great notoriety fall out. So too does the credibility and weight of all their words that have gone with it over the years. And it sucks. What you do matters, and you need to live with integrity because the eye of the Lord actually is always upon you. So when you live as though you are serving the Lord, when you work as though you're serving him and not man, you'll constantly be reminded that your Father's eye is always upon you. It's a matter of the heart, though, Paul's saying. Is your heart pure? We'll be able to tell by the way you work. Thirdly, he's going to say that we should serve as though everything we do is for the Lord. It's not about working for the man, it's about working for God. And if you can change your attitude some days, it'll change the way you feel about your work. We're not just here to try and win the people over, right? We don't just go to work so that we can lead them to Jesus or enforce our beliefs on them. That's also quite unhelpful. However, the quality of work we produce will be a reflection of our love and our devotion for the Lord. And really, we don't need many people to say it. We need so many more people to do it. Francis of Assisi was famously quoted by saying, "Preach the gospel always. If necessary, use words." It makes me think, though, about Daniel, who chose to not eat the fine food at the king's table. Instead, he ate nuts and raw veggies. But he served in such a way that he rose to the top. And it's quite an interesting thing. He was promoted and recognized as being a person both as above reproach, but excellent at his craft. And because of his excellence, the God he worshipped was honored and lifted up as well. When you work hard, it's a reflection on the one that you say you love and that you do all things for. The last one Paul says here is that we're called to serve for a reward. Feels a bit selfish, doesn't it? What does that mean? Serve for a reward. It's saying that you should go to work for more than just your paycheck. And those of you who are parents, stay-at-home parents, you're going to get this better than most of us. The promise here is that whatever good you do, the Lord will see it and reward it. It'll come back to you from God himself personally. He'll reward you and bless you as you serve to be a blessing to those around you. Some of these blessings will be an immediate. I know if you choose to foster your own art and go, God, today, even though I don't want to do this job, whether it's digging up another septic pit or a pump that's not working or whatever it is that you do, if you say, God, I do this in honor and service to you, it's going to immediately change your attitude. You get joy instead of feeling like it's a burden. But some of these blessings are going to be eternal. Somebody might find faith and hope because of the way you work. You won't get the joy of that, maybe some of it in this life, but most of it you'll get to the next. We're not here serving for the promotion or the praise of men. That's the point, though. The reward is him. We're all motivated by reward, and God knows our heart. And sometimes I think we try and hide that, and we shouldn't. The Lord created you, he knows you, he wired you. You know, David went and fought Goliath, we're told, because of the reward of the king's daughter. Sometimes we over-spiritualize that, but that's what the Bible tells us. He went for the reward. He went because his God's being dishonored, but he wanted the king's daughter too. All right, masters is where we finish. Treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know, listen to this, that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. If you're the boss, you got to treat your slaves the same way as you would treat the Lord. Now that's honor, and that's elevation. You're going to honor them as you would the Lord. Respect them as you would the Lord. You're not going to threaten them, which means don't use your power for your own gain. Don't lord it over them. Don't push them down. Don't make them feel less than. Don't subject them. There should be no sense of them being underneath you as a person. And to be fair, in Australian culture and context, we get this pretty well. We're pretty good. It's far worse in other places around the world. But I still want to ask, does this happen at your place? I listened to a guy, Tim Keller, this week, and it's interesting. He talked about the environment in a hospital. And he said there is such a hierarchy in a hospital, right? From the consultants, doctors, registrars, nurses, what else do we have in there? Orderlies, cleaners, so on and so forth it goes. He said there's just such a hierarchy in there. We see the same in a courtroom. Judge, barrister, solicitor, clerk, victim, defendant. It's just this long, big, long line. Schools, not much different. You know, Jesus modeled for us, though, that he came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life for many. We've got to have the same attitude as Jesus. So whether we're at home or we're at work, Jesus is still the big picture for us. Nick, you guys can come up. We'll We'll close. We'll sing a song. All right, let me give you some things to go home with. Submission is countercultural. When you submit to anybody wholeheartedly, when you work as though you're working for the Lord and not for man, you're going to look different. You know, the natural world is actually going to say, hey, why do you live this way? That's not a bad thing. But hopefully you're doing the right thing and you're living and working with enough integrity that people are going to want to know about what you believe in, know about who you put your trust in, and then actually do something about that. So I want to suggest to you today that maybe for some of you, it's your attitude towards your workplace. Maybe you might want to ask the Spirit to transform that for you. Just wake up in the morning and say, Father, can you just give me the joy of serving you today and not man? Can you show me where there's purpose in what I'm doing? Can you help release or awaken whatever it is that you've put in me that needs to be expressed to the people around me? I love that Sheree didn't stop working on her craft. 5 people read her blog for years. Some of us, we give up after 5 minutes. Some of you, the Lord has put things in your heart that you actually have to be diligent with and keep working on. Don't give up on them. Last thing I probably want to make a comment on is, and I'll get you all to stand, as we prepare to just to sing. I just want to, just a brief word to dads again. Parents, both physical and spiritual, raising kids has got to be a chief priority for us. In fact, as a community, right, as a larger body of Christ's family, we're actually called to help each other raise each other's kids. You know that? It's not a solo exercise, but your kids need to be in community for that to happen. And good community. Community they're going to be surrounded by, that are going to love them, help them, and call out that Christ-like identity. But dads, I want to tell you too, when you're at home with your kids, read the Bible to them, talk to them, pray with them, tell them daily how God sees them and why that should matter to them. Because you know what the best part is? The best promise and the best reward from that is the more you impart that into your kids, guess who else hears it at the same time? You. It's a joy to be loved by the Lord. It's a joy to worship the Lord. It's a joy to submit to the Lord as our example Jesus shows us.